so a simple verse, one verse. So why did they teach that? Well, it was easy to memorize one verse. It wasn't complicated. You didn't have to remember what's the which is actually, it's in small complement of the Greek Orthodox tradition. And it's an example of a short prayer, a prayer that comes from Scripture, a prayer that is not complicated to remember. And the advantage to that was that the person could be constantly reciting it. There'll be a way someone draws their attention back to God and to remember to continually call out to Him. And it can be said silently, or it can be repeated. Now, I'm sure most of you, because of the popular practice in literature, are, of course, familiar with the Jesus prayer. It arises out of the very same tradition or practice, which would be called the prayer of the publican, who says, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Or, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner." Or, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy." So that is part of what we call the heritage the early Christians of our church on prayer. And if you were to distill the writings of St. John Cassian into a page, you could take a lesson from when he's talking about how one of the fathers was teaching his disciples, that is, St. John Cassian went through the Egyptian desert, maybe a little bit like a busybody, maybe tricking people into talking. And he would take down things and record what they said. Whether he did it with a piece of paper in front of him or later in his cell that evening, I don't know. The many cameras I had weren't working back then. So that's how he records teaching about prayer in this way. The chapters 9 and 10, or the conferences 9 and 10 in this big book, don't be intimidated by the size, by the way. Conferences 9 and 10 are specifically about prayer. Many of the other conferences also include a discussion about prayer. These are the questions John Cassian was asking. So he went through the Egyptian desert, and he went to visit these elders who often were living either by themselves or with a group of disciples. Went into the area of Egypt, which was called Sketis, from which we get the later nomenclature of a small monastic habitation called a skete. And there he would ask them questions about the spiritual life. Yes, he was very inquisitive, but fortunately for us, he recorded all this. And later he brought it to the west, to Marseille, south of France. And as far as we know, he had a very serious influence on the Western Christian tradition, specifically, for example, directly through the rule of St. Benedict. Okay? And curiously, even though I think up to the present, St. John Cassian is actually not a formally canonized saint of the Roman Catholic Church, he was always a major influence on St. Benedict and Western monasticism. The Western Christian tradition really relies on St. Benedict. So this was one of the major ways in which early Christian prayer was taught and popularized. We also have the entire realm of liturgical prayer. Not only in church, not only on Sunday mornings, as I'm sure your priest has been communicating to you non-stop for years, Not merely on Sundays or Saturday evening on Sundays, but every day. Every day of the week. There are even some homes in which people try more or less to keep some sort of common prayer, even in the family, hopefully in the healthiest way possible. And even with some sort of hours of prayer. And punctuating the day with prayer. So there's ultimately not a time when we've forgotten to pray. Allowing prayer to sanctify the entire day. And that's one of the, that really was the way that for example, the monastics deliberately set this hours of prayer. And then later, in some traditions, they had what they called I'm going to mispronounce it, Lauperini.
Yeah, Mosaic histories.
No, the perpetual prayers, Laos. How do you pronounce that? Very clearly in Latin.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Okay, the perpetual prayer. And they even, in some monasteries, they had teams. And they had teams of prayer to be rotating in church so that the prayer in the church never stopped. And maybe that's a very literal way of fulfilling the injunction by the apostle, pray unceasingly. So our task is, as articulated by St. Gregory the theologian, now don't take this too literally, okay? Who teaches Scripture? You teach Scripture here? Okay, an interpretation of Scripture too? Okay. Don't take this too literally. But St. Gregory the theologian has the famous dictum which says, better to remember God than even breathe. Right? So it's the same idea, pray unceasingly. Again, don't take that too literally, or I become responsible for having said it in your church. Father Mark, I think, will give all sorts of classes on the proper interpretation of Scripture. Right? So, but that's our task, to remember God. To have Him ever before us. And we do that, for example, with the Christian, the tradition of Christian representational art, with iconography, or, for example, stained glass windows, depiction of the cross, the blessing of homes, stations of the cross, banners, to always have a remembrance of God always before us. And that reminds us to pray. It's like when your children go out the door to school, and if you weren't taking them, then you bless them. Or as the door is shut, there's a little icon or cross above the doorway. And you're praying for them the minute they leave. So, to always be remembering God. And then, of course, this flowers, this culminates in our common liturgical gathering on the Lord's Day, to do this until He comes again. And to have the Lord's Day not as the kind of object of our vacation, but the climax of the entire week. That everything leads up till, not TGIF, but everything leads up till the Sunday liturgy, the Sunday Eucharistic assembly. All our efforts, your job as teachers, or those of you who work and simply support the school, that the work you do at the school receives its full value in your Eucharistic gathering on Sunday. It's not just what you're doing in the classroom. And hopefully you will continually, I get a little Catholic here. You get to this point called critical mass. All right? Gathering together, and the community gathers together so strongly that everyone is drawn to be a part of the church community. And there's nothing that you would substitute to being in church on the Lord's Day. There's no other priority. But that's formed with how you're living each day, how you're instructing, in this specific case, children, how you're praying, how not just a formal prayer at the beginning. I don't know if you do that here at the school. At each class, I know you do at the beginning of the day. Even the teachers gathering together. We have this temptation in our lives. We have some, for example, members of our choir in Dallas. They will arrive at 9:29 or 9:30 service, or just come through the door shuts at 6:30 in the evening sharp, and they made it to Vespers. But being there in advance, being prepared, being with the other chanters or singers, being in your seats or standing in church before the service begins. We call that being recollected, gathered. In the well-known book, St. John of the Ladder, the 28th chapter, which is on prayer, but that's not really relevant right at the moment. St. John sees this monk, and he sees him in church, gathered, and he asks him, a little bit like John Cassian, a little bit too inquisitively, "What are you doing?" He says, "I come into church, and I gather, and I say to my thoughts, oh, come let us worship God our King. Oh, come let us worship and fall down before Christ our King and God. Oh, come let us worship and fall down before Christ himself our King and God." As he gathers himself before the service begins. People arriving not only on time, a new definition of on time is that by the time the service begins, you're prepared. You're prepared to pray. And then the first 10, 15 minutes of the service is not about shuffling or some sort of disarray, clomp, clomp, clomp. There's also the ladies with the high heels. We have a wooden floor, so. But you're already recollected, gathered. And there could be nothing else more kind of appropriate for you to already be placed. St. the only selling point of this is they get a better parking. They actually get a parking spot at the cathedral if they arrive on time. Otherwise, there's no room to find the street. I know you walk over here. And so we become recollected, become praying with concern for those who we love in our heart, making our supplication before God, and offering above all, as I'm sure Father Mark and Father Chrysostom make crystal clear to your congregations, to offer thanksgiving, which is the root of the word for Eucharist. That's what we do. We come to God, before God, as one, not merely as we're called free radicals. We come to God as one to offer a common thanksgiving. Common thanksgiving because hearing the words of prayer in church with one mind and one heart, with our lips coming together to form one common prayer of thanksgiving to God. And so that takes not only the priest to offer the words of the liturgy, but the faithful to be doing the same thing, offering the same Amen, chanting the thrice holy hymn. So this is a little task that lies here for your community and at large. And I'm actually quite delighted that with Seraphim's arrival and Father Chris's appointment, formally within a few weeks of each other. This is a great boost to the whole Fort Worth area. And there's no reason that somehow to be Orthodox you would have to go to Dallas to identify yourselves as Orthodox. You can do it right here and make this a community that everyone desires, in which everyone desires to participate. We did a little discussion about inviting someone, a specific person, to bring one working icon here also in the midst for the kind of veneration, the larger veneration of the holy objects of our church, and to see our own communities as holy places. We have the tradition in our church of pilgrimage, but pilgrimage isn't necessarily going to Jerusalem or going to Zakynthos or Egina. There's nothing wrong with doing that, by the way. But what about people making pilgrimages to Fort Worth? I know some of you probably have made a pilgrimage to Lubbock. Okay. But make a pilgrimage to Fort Worth or pilgrimage to Dallas. It doesn't all mean going over the Holy Land. It's how you're going to be shaping your community by beginning with shaping the people entrusted to care, younger people, students. And this is a holy task, but it's a task which depends not only on cultivating the intellect, which most certainly will do, building character, nurturing the life of the Spirit, and ultimately it culminates in, we'll go back to that word again, custody of the heart. That you would know what's in your heart, what you allow there. If there are secret recesses of the human being in which iniquity or wickedness lie, that God, by your invitation, comes in and cleanses those. And you know exactly then what is within your heart, what you are doing in your heart, and what abides there. And ultimately, this is the task of prayer. And I think when St. Seraphim of Sarov says that the aim of the Christian life is not really prayer or almsgiving or all these other things. He says, but acquiring the grace and the Spirit of God. That ultimately that is that the grace of God is going to fill your heart. And you, as an Orthodox Christian, consciously living spiritual life, are seeing to it that you are taking care of the custody of your heart, and what lies there, beats there, and pounds there, and offers worship. And the church fathers, really, as they are setting forth principles of the Orthodox Christian life, saying it is there the mind descends into the heart, and there it makes offerings to God. There the sacrifice of praise is offered most properly with the mind or this intellect in full cooperation and submission to the heart of a human being where God is enthroned, and not anything else. We won't go back to those distractions, etc. Focused and determined, and ultimately the lives of the children here at the school will be influenced by what you do as teachers, administrators, guardians of the school. And that's a really sacred calling and responsibility. It's a really beautiful thing. So may God bless the beginning of the year for you and the faculty of this church and church school, and bless the work that you do here, a holy work, and a work which maybe will serve as an example and model other church communities.
Thank you so much, Father.